Today's video is about Plato and his views on education. Plato was born into an aristocratic Athenian family. Some of his family members were among the 30 tyrants who ruled Athens after the defeat to Sparta. He may have been in personal danger after the re-establishment of a democracy, and during this time his teacher and friend Socrates was condemned to death in 399 BCE. Plato was to spend several years away from Athens, some of them as a tutor and a political advisor in Sicily. When he returned from his visit to Sicily, he set up his famous academy, which was a philosophical community which attracted young men from around the Greek world, including the Macedonian Aristotle. Plato continued to write and teach until he died at the age of 80. Plato's preferred literary device was the philosophical dialogue, and more than 20 of these have survived. Some of them, for example the Symposium and the Phaedo, are as much masterpieces of dramatic art as they are pieces of philosophical inquiry. In nearly all of these dialogues the main speaker is Socrates, although it is generally agreed that only in the early dialogues are the views expressed by Socrates those of the actual historical Socrates. By the time of the more mature dialogues, such as in the Republic, Socrates has become the mouthpiece for views original to Plato himself. The most important of Plato's views or ideas is his theory of forms, or theory of ideas or types, according to which what is most truly real are the immaterial abstract entities, such as beauty, of which empirically observable items in the physical world are simply imperfect copies. For both Plato and Socrates, the most important business of philosophy and of life was morality. The morally good life alone ensures happiness and brings human fulfillment. Since a fully moral existence requires rational understanding of the virtues of human nature and of truth, for both men it's logical that an essential ingredient of the good life is philosophical reason. For Plato, virtue is one. Various virtues are parts of this virtue, and they must be grasped in their intimate unity. The emphasis that Plato puts on unity culminates in his claim that the enlightened philosopher attains knowledge of the supreme form, that of the good, which is the source of the intelligibility, nature, and very being of everything else. Plato's reflections on education, as on other subjects, remain among the most influential in the intellectual history of the West. In Protagoras, for instance, he remarks on the purposes and nature of education in his dialogues, and similarly in Republic. In Protagoras, for instance, Socrates challenges the credentials of Protagoras, a sophist, a paid teacher of young Athenians destined for professions. The sophists would teach people how to live properly, and Socrates questioned the sophists and Protagoras given their subjectivist or relativist attitude towards truth and morality. Similarly, in the slave boy section of the Meno, Plato argues that some of our knowledge, for instance mathematical knowledge, is not learnt at all. Instead, the teacher is simply reminding the boy or enabling him to recollect things that he already and innately knows. In the Phaedrus, Plato describes a pre-bodily life during which the soul is originally acquainted with the forms. It is this acquaintance of which the pupil is reminded of by the teacher. Educationists who emphasize children's innate cognitive endowment are often associated with a child-centered approach to education, a hands-off policy of allowing the child's understanding to naturally blossom. But this is not the approach of Plato in Republic. For Plato, education, yes, it may clean and reignite a mental organ which everyone has. He believes that strict control of children's environments and upbringing is necessary if this organ, this mental organ, is not to be ruined or blinded. In the Republic, there are 70 or so pages dedicated to education, and the purposes of these pages is to prescribe a pedagogic program for producing the guardians or philosopher kings who are to be the rulers of the imaginary state that Plato outlines in the dialogue. It's not clear if Plato intended this political system, uh, including its educational arrangements, to be one which people could sensibly aspire to. However, for Plato, the point of this political discussion is to provide an analogy on a large scale for the individual person or soul. Since a whole community is comparable in certain respects with an individual, reflection on the former may cast light both on what it is for a person to be just or moral, and on why it is that only such a person can genuinely prosper and be happy. At the heart of this analogy is a comparison between the kinds or classes of people who make up the polity and the parts of the individual soul or personality. Plato argued that just as a flourishing state is one in which each class sticks to what it is most suited for, an individual also flourishes only when each of his or her own faculties does not trespass beyond its proper domain. For Plato, the community should be ruled by those whose special talent and function is rational direction of public affairs, and similarly, the individual's life should be under the rule of the highest faculty, which for Plato was reason. The educational prescriptions in Republic should be seen then as not as a program for constructing a political utopia, but more as recommendations for developing moral reason in the individual. Plato suggests that the future guardians should study mathematical subjects for 10 years before moving on to dialectic or philosophy. This is his way of making the point that mathematics not only encourages the abstract disciplined thinking essential to philosophical inquiry, but because it deals with immaterial and timeless objects like numbers, this attracts the mind towards that which is most utterly real, the realm of the forms. The aim of higher education for Plato, the main components of higher education are mathematics and dialectic. And the aim of this higher education is not for the amassing of information or knowledge for its own sake, or even acquiring practical skills. But for Plato, the aim of higher education is the reorientation of a mind from a kind of twilight to a true daylight. The reorientated person will have risen above immersion in mundane empirical matters towards that articulate understanding of the order of things. Without this understanding of the order of things, his opinions, even if they are true opinions, they do not constitute grounded knowledge. This grounded knowledge that can afford effective and stable guidance in life. Plato suggests that it would be harmful to initiate young children into this rational moral understanding prior to an advanced stage in their education. Because children are incapable of mastering such understanding, any premature attempts to get children to reason for themselves will only make the children rebellious and disrespectful of traditional wisdom. In the earlier sections of Republic, Plato discusses the cultural and physical education of the young. Here he defends the notion that education is a training of character above all else. Close direction of the child's educational environment, especially in the very early years when the child absorbs every impression that anyone wishes to stamp upon it, is necessary. First, in order to counteract those pressures, including sensual appetites, that threaten to smother the innate yet fragile propensity for reason. It is also more positively required so that the young are able to acquire effective dispositions, such as a love of grace and elegance. This love of grace and elegance and these effective dispositions, they are prerequisites to the eventual appreciation of the beauty of reason. For Plato, it doesn't matter that for a considerable time the young person will have no conscious, rational grasp of why things are beautiful or good. For Plato, the urgent task is to develop a character that is receptive to and eager for enlightenment and mental clarity. For Plato, culture at large, including music and architecture, forms an educational environment and has the power to shape impressionable young minds. Plato's particular focus is the effect upon character of literature, of the epics, odes, and dramas that were the mainstay of Athenian education, as well as a primary medium for the dissemination of ideas and information among the populace. Plato criticizes most of this literature, including Homer, for failing to respect the gods, heroes, and great men who were role models for the young. He is also critical of the practice of having young people represent mean-spirited or otherwise contemptible people by acting parts or recitation, with the result that they take on the character of those they are imitating. Plato also suggests that poets are to be banished from the community because the poets, they work on the emotions rather than by addressing reason, and as such they are engaged in an ancient quarrel with philosophy. So as such, only art of the most ethical kind is to be permitted. Okay, so what are some criticisms of Plato? One criticism might be that Plato possesses a paternalistic attitude towards cultural education, and this has been a prime target for liberal critics of his program. However, it could be said that much of this criticism is guilty of anachronism and of mistaking Plato's purpose. Plato's concerns might be comparable with the ones that people express today over the effects of TV, violence on TV and pop music, the effects of this on impressionable young children. Another criticism of Plato is the purpose of Plato's program of literary education to further the establishment of a totalitarian regime? The answer to this could be, well, no, it's rather to emphasize the dramatic way that the massive impact of the cultural environment on the individual's eventual receptiveness to reason and morality. Another criticism might be Plato's lack of respect for the autonomy of the child, elitism. But is this criticism of elitism leveled against Plato guilty of misunderstanding or anachronism? Maybe, because only sons of wealthy Athenians were formally educated. So Plato advocating restricting higher education to the few, he was being no more elitist than his contemporaries of the day. Plato, he believed that women should receive the same higher education as men. The only relevant criterion was the possession of the required natural abilities. He didn't discriminate between men and women. However, Plato would perhaps scorn modern calls for mass higher education. Why? Not because higher education should be the privilege of a future ruling elite, However, he might say that the natural abilities people must have to benefit from demanding intellectual disciplines are possessed by relatively few. A more pertinent criticism of Plato's work is his emphasis on the abstract disciplines of mathematics and philosophy, and that this focus is unwarranted. For Plato, philosophy is not a hived off professional pursuit, but it's rather the form of understanding that confers the ability to take an overview of other types of understanding, and also confers the mental clarity that enables a person to explain or render articulate the nature of and interconnections among the objects of knowledge. So what is his influence on education? Well, in modern education, there is an indifference to this kind of understanding and mental clarity, which Plato advocates for. Nowadays, the acquisition of information and practical skills and autonomy are more highly prized, and this will explain why Plato's theory of education, which was deeply admired during past eras, such as in the Renaissance, nowadays is more often attacked than applauded. However, Plato's views, they continue to attract comment, critical though as these comments may be, confirms the perception that the legacy of Plato's philosophy of education has been Western philosophy of education itself. If you found this video useful, then consider subscribing to our channel on YouTube for more videos about education. Thank you.